Hello there everyone, welcome to Nightmare Narratives. I am your storyteller and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious, where are you watching from and what time is it in your part of the world? Now, find your cozy spot and relax. My name is Vincent Ashworth, and I've been a park ranger at Sequoia National Park for 8 years now. What I'm about to tell you happened in the winter of 1962, and it changed everything I believed about darkness itself. Back then, I was 29 years old and thought I'd seen everything. Korea taught me about real darkness, the kind that hides enemies and swallows hope. When I came home, the peaceful giant trees of California seemed like heaven compared to those frozen hills overseas. I married my sweetheart Sarah, and we had twin daughters, Emma and Lucy. We lived in park housing, surrounded by the most beautiful trees on earth. I specialized in night patrol and cave rescue. The park has hundreds of caves running under the giant sequoias, and people get lost in them all the time. I knew every tunnel, every drop, every dangerous spot. My military training helped. I could move through pitch-black caves like they were my own backyard. December 1962 was brutal. The worst snowfall in 20 years hit the park, and temperatures dropped to 15 below zero. By 4 in the afternoon, it was already dark as midnight. The snow fell so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Phone lines went down, and we were cut off from the outside world, 30 miles from the nearest town. That's when the Morrison family went missing. Tom Morrison had brought his wife and 3 kids to spend Christmas week in one of the park cabins. Good people from Sacramento. Tom was a teacher. His wife Mary worked at the library. Their kids were 8, 10, and 12. The kind of family you'd want as neighbors. When they didn't check in after the blizzard started, I knew something was wrong. Tom was careful, the type who followed every rule. He would have called if they were okay. My partner Eddie Hawkins and I bundled up and headed out into the storm. The wind howled through the giant sequoias like something alive and angry. Snow whipped around us so hard it felt like tiny needles hitting our faces. Our flashlights barely cut through the white wall of falling snow. "This is crazy, Vince," Eddie shouted over the wind. "We can't see anything out here." He was right, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was really wrong. In Korea, I'd learned to trust my gut. Right now, my gut was screaming danger. We found the Morrison cabin after an hour of searching. That's when things got strange. Every light in the cabin was on. We could see the warm yellow glow through the windows, but when we got closer, something felt off. The snow around the cabin was perfect, untouched. No footprints, no tire tracks, nothing. Like the family had just vanished into thin air. Tom called out, pounding on the door. "Mary, it's the park service." No answer. The door was unlocked, so we pushed it open. That's when I felt it for the first time, that cold that has nothing to do with winter. The air inside the cabin was so cold I could see my breath, even though every heater was running full blast. But it wasn't just cold. It was wrong. "Jesus," Eddie whispered. "It's colder in here than outside." I pulled out my flashlight and clicked it on. The beam seemed weak, like it was fighting to push through thick fog. But there was no fog. The air was clear. "Hello," I called again. "Morrison family." The cabin was neat and clean. Suitcases unpacked, beds made, food in the refrigerator, coffee still warm on the stove, like the family had just stepped out for a minute. But they were gone, all 5 of them, gone without a trace. We searched that cabin from top to bottom. Eddie checked the bedrooms while I looked through the kitchen and living room. Everything was normal except for the impossible cold and the way our flashlights seemed to dim every few minutes. "Vince," Eddie called from the back bedroom. His voice sounded strange, tight with fear. "You need to see this." I found him standing in the doorway of the kids' room, shining his flashlight at the wall. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I saw them handprints on the wall, black as night. "What do you think made those?" Caddy asked. I moved closer. The handprints looked like they'd been made with paint, but when I touched one, my finger came away clean. The print was perfectly black, like it absorbed light instead of reflecting it. "Could be charcoal," I said, but I didn't believe it. These prints were too dark, too perfect. And they were small, child-sized. "There's more," Eddie said. He led me to the living room and pointed at the wall by the fireplace. More handprints, dozens of them. all different sizes. Some adult, some child, all perfectly black. I tried to take pictures, but something was wrong with my camera. The flash worked, but when I looked at the photos later, they showed nothing but solid black where the handprint should be. "We need to call this in," I said. But when we tried the radio, all we got was static. The phone lines were still down. We were on our own. Outside, the storm was getting worse. The wind howled through the trees like screaming voices. But now I heard something else, a sound like footsteps crunching through snow. "Someone's out there," Eddie whispered. We grabbed our flashlights and stepped onto the porch. The snow was still falling hard, but I could see tracks leading away from the cabin. Not normal tracks, these were perfectly black, like holes burned into the white snow. "What the hell?" Eddie breathed. I knelt down and looked closer. The tracks were human-shaped, but wrong somehow. Too long, too narrow, and they seemed to absorb light, just like the handprints. "We follow them," I said. "Are you crazy? In this storm, 5 people are missing." Eddie, a family with 3 kids. He didn't like it, but he followed me. We traced the black tracks through the snow, deeper into the forest. The giant sequoias loomed around us like ancient guardians, their massive trunks disappearing into the swirling snow above. The tracks led us in a straight line for about a quarter mile. Then they just stopped. One second they were there, clear as day in the snow. The next second, nothing. "Where did they go?" Eddie asked. I shined my flashlight up into the trees, looking for climbing marks or broken branches. That's when I saw it, a shadow moving wrong. Most shadows stay still unless there's a light source moving. This one slid along the trunk of a giant sequoia like liquid darkness. "Eddie," I whispered, "look up." But when he raised his flashlight, the shadow was gone. We spent another hour searching, but found nothing else. The storm was getting dangerous, and we had to get back, all the way to the truck. I felt like something was watching us from the darkness between the trees. 2 days later, the Miller family disappeared from a campground 3 miles away. Same thing, no tracks, no signs of struggle, like they'd just vanished. But this time, I found something the first team missed, black residue on the walls of their trailer, and that same impossible cold hanging in the air. The residue looked like soot, but when I tested it with my flashlight, it swallowed the beam completely. I was starting to think we weren't dealing with a normal missing persons case. After the Miller family vanished, the park supervisor wanted to close the whole area, but we couldn't leave without knowing what happened to those people. 8 people don't just disappear without a trace. I started patrolling alone at night, against regulations. Eddie refused to come with me after what we'd seen at the Morrison cabin. He said the place gave him nightmares. "There's something wrong with the darkness out there, Vince," he told me. "It's not natural." I thought he was being dramatic. I'd spent plenty of nights in dangerous places. Darkness was just darkness, the absence of light, nothing more. I was wrong. The 3rd night, I was checking the area around the Morrison cabin when I saw them again, those black footprints in the snow. Fresh ones, like they'd been made minutes before. They led deeper into the forest, toward the ancient grove where the biggest sequoias grew. I followed them, my flashlight beam cutting through the falling snow. The prints were clearer now, and I could see they weren't quite human. The toes were too long, the heel too narrow, like human feet stretched out of shape. The trail led me to a clearing I'd never seen before, even after 8 years in the park. In the center stood the biggest sequoia I'd ever laid eyes on, icily 30 feet across, reaching up into the darkness like a pillar holding up the sky. The black footprints circled the tree 3 times, then stopped at a hole in the trunk about 6 feet up. The hole was perfectly round, like a doorway cut into the living wood. I climbed up and shined my flashlight inside. The beam seemed to die just a few feet into the hole, swallowed by absolute darkness. But I could hear something moving inside, a sound like rustling leaves, or maybe whispering voices. "Hello," I called. "Is someone in there?" The rustling stopped. Then I heard it, a voice, but not quite human. It sounded like wind through dry leaves, forming words I almost recognized. "Light ... bringer ... My flashlight flickered and went out. I shook it, hit it, but nothing happened. The battery was brand new that morning. In the absolute darkness, I heard movement, something large shifting inside the tree. Then footsteps, not on the ground, but on the trunk itself, like something walking down the bark. I fumbled for my backup flashlight, my hands shaking. When I got it working, I almost dropped it. A shadow stood 10 feet away, perfectly human in shape but wrong in every detail. It was tall, maybe 7 feet, with arms that hung too long and fingers that stretched like branches. But the worst part was its face, or lack of one. Where features should be, there was only smooth darkness. "You see me," it said, in that wind-through-leaves voice. "Few can see me in the light." I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The thing tilted its head, studying me like I was an interesting insect. "You have been in the deep dark," it continued. "You understand shadows." It was talking about Korea, I realized. The caves and tunnels where I'd learned to move in absolute darkness. "What are you?" I managed to ask. "Guardian, protector. The trees are old, older than your kind. I keep them safe." "What happened to the families?" The shadow thing moved closer. I could feel cold radiating from it, like heat from a fire. But backwards, my breath came out in white puffs. They brought light where light should not be. They cut, they burned, they took. I stopped them. "Where are they now?" It gestured toward the hole in the tree. "Safe, sleeping. They will not hurt the old ones again." I shined my flashlight at the hole. The beam died again, but not before. I saw something that made my blood freeze. Pale shapes inside the tree, unmoving. "The missing families. They're dead," I whispered. "Not dead. Changed, like you will be changed." The shadow reached for me with those 2 long fingers. I stumbled backward, pulling out my emergency flare. When I popped it, brilliant red light flooded the clearing. The shadow thing shrieked and melted back into the darkness between the trees. But I could still hear its voice, coming from everywhere at once. "You cannot run from darkness, Lightbringer. I am in every shadow, every corner, where your light cannot reach. I am coming for you." I ran. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I ran through the forest like a scared kid, the flare held high above my head. Behind me, I could hear something moving through the trees. Branches breaking, snow crunching, getting closer. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck. I should have left the park that night. Should have grabbed Sarah and the girls and driven as far away as possible. But I couldn't stop thinking about those pale shapes in the tree. The Morrison family, the Millers, maybe still alive, maybe savable. The next morning, I did research. The park had old records, some dating back to the 1800s. I found stories about the Yokuts tribe, who lived in the area before it became a park. They had legends about something they called the darkness that eats light, a guardian spirit that protected the ancient trees. According to the stories, the spirit had been sleeping for decades, but recent years had brought more visitors, more development, more disturbance to the old grove. Maybe that's what woke it up. I tried to get help, but who would believe me? A shadow monster living in a tree. They'd think I'd lost my mind. That evening, I went back to the grove. I brought every light I could carry. Flashlights, lanterns, road flares, even a car spotlight powered by a portable battery. If this thing fed on darkness, I'd give it more light than it could handle. The ancient sequoia stood in the center of the clearing, unchanged. But now I could see more other holes in other trees, like a network of connected spaces. This wasn't just one tree. It was a whole system, underground and above. "I knew you would return," the shadow voice said. It stepped out from behind the tree, bigger now, more solid. In the light of my lanterns, I could see details I'd missed before. Its skin looked like bark, rough and dark. Its eyes were holes that went deeper than they should. "You cannot save them," it said. "They are part of the grove now, part of the protection." "Let me see them," I said. "Let me see if they're really alive." The shadow thing considered this. Then it gestured to the hole in the tree. "Look, if you must, but you will not like what you see." I climbed up and shined my strongest flashlight into the hole. This time, the beam penetrated deeper, and I saw the truth. The Morrison family was there, but they weren't quite human anymore. Their skin had a gray, bark-like texture. Their eyes were solid black, like holes in their faces. They stood perfectly still, like statues, but they were breathing, still alive somehow. "Mary," I called softly. "Tom." "Mary." Morrison's head turned toward me. When she spoke, her voice was like wind through leaves, just like the shadow things. "We are safe now," she said. "We protect the trees. We are one with the grove." The children stood behind her, their faces empty of everything that made them human. They'd been changed, transformed into something else. "This is wrong," I said to the shadow thing. "You can't just take people. I take only those who threaten the old ones. You have seen what your kind does, cutting, burning, destroying. I stopped the destruction. These people weren't destroying anything. They were just visiting. All visitors become threats. All threats must be stopped. The shadow thing moved closer. Now I could see it clearly. 12 feet tall, with arms that reached the ground and fingers like twisted branches. It was ancient, older than the trees themselves. "You will join them," it said. "You will help protect the grove." "No," I said, pulling out a flare. "I won't." The flare burst into brilliant light. The shadow thing screamed and staggered back, but it didn't disappear. Instead, it seemed to grow larger, feeding on the darkness around the edges of the light. "Light makes shadows," it hissed. "Shadows make me stronger." It was right. Every light source created shadows, and in those shadows, the thing grew more powerful. My lanterns weren't helping, they were feeding it. But I had one more idea. I'd brought a whole case of road flares, the kind we used for emergency signals. Instead of lighting them one at a time, I lit them all at once. 30 flares, burning with the intensity of a small sun. The clearing filled with blazing red light. There were no shadows anywhere, just pure, overwhelming brightness. The shadow thing shrieked and began to dissolve. But as it faded, it spoke one last time. "This is not over. Lightbringer, darkness always returns. I will find you then." It was gone, and the clearing was empty except for the blazing flares. I climbed into the tree and found the Morrison family, still standing like statues. But now their eyes were normal, human again. They were unconscious but breathing. It took me 3 trips to get them all out. The Miller family was in another tree, deeper in the grove. By the time I'd carried them all to safety, the flares were burning out in the growing darkness. I could hear something moving in the trees. The shadow thing wasn't gone, just wounded, waiting for the light to die. I got everyone to my truck and drove to the hospital in town. The doctors said it was a miracle all late people were alive, just suffering from severe hypothermia and exposure. They'd recover completely. But I knew the truth. The shadow thing had let them go. It was weak now, hurt by the intense light, but it was still out there, still hungry. The official report listed it as a case of exposure and hypothermia. The Morrison and Miller families had apparently gotten lost in the blizzard and taken shelter in tree hollows. Lucky to be alive, the papers said. Only I knew different. The Park Service closed the ancient grove to visitors. They said it was for environmental protection, but I knew the real reason. They couldn't have people disappearing again. I tried to go back to normal patrol duties, but something had changed in me. I couldn't handle darkness anymore. Even normal shadows made me nervous. I started carrying multiple flashlights, backup batteries, emergency flares. Sarah noticed, but I couldn't tell her the truth. 3 months later, I quit the Park Service. We moved to Phoenix, where there's sunshine 300 days a year. I got a job as a security guard at a shopping mall. Lots of light, lots of people, no dark corners. But I still get letters from my old partner Eddie. He says strange things happen in the park during power outages. Visitors report seeing shadows that move wrong, and sometimes people go missing for a few hours before turning up with no memory of where they've been. The shadow thing is still there, still guarding its ancient trees. Weaker now, but patient. It can afford to wait. Those sequoias have been growing for thousands of years. A few decades is nothing to something that old. I've never told anyone this story before, not Sarah, not my daughters, not the therapist I saw for the nightmares. But I'm getting old now, and I think people should know the truth. There are places in this world where darkness isn't just the absence of light. Sometimes it's the presence of something else. Something that's been waiting in the shadows far longer than we've been walking upright. The ancient grove is still closed to visitors. The official reason is environmental protection. But if you ever find yourself in Sequoia National Park and you see those warning signs around the giant forest area, pay attention to them. Some boundaries aren't meant to be crossed. Some darkness isn't meant to be disturbed. And if you're ever camping in the deep woods and you feel that cold that has nothing to do with weather, pack up and leave. Don't wait until morning. Don't try to investigate. Just run, because some shadows are hungry and they've been waiting a very long time for their next meal. My name is Robert Frostborn, and I've been a park ranger for 17 years. I've seen bears tear apart campsites, watched avalanches bury entire valleys, and pulled frozen bodies from snow caves. But nothing prepared me for what happened in February 1971, during the worst winter Montana had seen in 50 years. I was stationed at the Going Toothson Road Ranger post in Glacier National Park. It's a lonely job in winter, especially when you're cut off from the world for weeks at a time. The snow that year was different, deeper, meaner. 20-foot drifts buried the roads, and the temperature hadn't climbed above -40 for 3 weeks straight. My radio died on a Tuesday. Lightning from a freak storm fried the circuits, leaving me with nothing but static and the howling wind for company. The isolation didn't bother me much. After my divorce, I'd grown used to being alone. My ex-wife said I preferred the mountains to people, and maybe she was right. I'd been working these mountains since I was 25, back when logging was still big business around here. The Blackfeet elders used to come through the camps, telling stories about the old days. They'd talk about Wendigo creatures born from hunger so deep it changed a man's soul. I thought they were just trying to scare us city boys. The morning it started, I was checking my supplies when I noticed something odd. The ravens that usually picked through my garbage were gone. Not just quiet, completely absent. In years, I'd never seen the forest this empty. No tracks in the snow, no sounds except the wind. Even the mice had vanished. That's when I got the emergency beacon. The signal came from about 8 miles north, up in the high country, where the ski patrol had gone 3 days earlier. They were supposed to be back by now. Bill Morrison was leading that team, 30 years of mountain rescue experience, and he'd never missed a check-in. I loaded my pack with emergency supplies and strapped on my snowshoes. The wind was picking up, and fresh snow was falling fast. In conditions like these, you can get lost 50 feet from your own front door. But those boys were counting on me. The hike took 4 hours through snow that wanted to swallow me whole. Every step was a fight, and the cold bit through my gear like it was made of paper. But I kept following that beacon signal, even when it led me into places that felt wrong. The forest was too quiet, not peaceful quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you check over your shoulder every few steps, the kind that makes you wonder if you're being watched. I found their shelter just after noon, and my blood turned cold. The emergency hut was destroyed, but not from any avalanche. The roof had been torn off from the inside, and the walls looked like something with claws had tried to dig its way out. Supplies were scattered everywhere, sleeping bags shredded, food cans opened and emptied, gear thrown around like a tornado had hit. But it was the bones that stopped me cold. Human bones, picked clean and gnawed to the marrow. They were scattered around the shelter in a rough circle, like someone had been sitting in the middle, eating. The bite marks were wrong, too big for any animal I knew, but clearly made by teeth. I found Bill's jacket hanging from a broken beam, torn and bloody. His radio was smashed, but his emergency beacon was still beeping. That's what had led me here. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe a bear had found them after they'd already died. From exposure, maybe the cold had driven them to... I couldn't finish that thought. Not about Bill. Not about good men who'd helped me pull survivors from slide zones. That's when I heard the crying. It was coming from the tree line, maybe 100 yards away. A man's voice, weak and desperate. "Help me," it called. "Please, I'm hurt bad." I knew that voice. It was Danny Martinez, one of the patrol members. He was alive. I followed the sound deeper into the woods, calling his name. The crying stayed just ahead of me, always out of sight behind the next tree. Snow was falling harder now, and I was losing the light. "Danny," I shouted, "stay where you are. I'm coming." But when I reached the spot where the voice had been, I found something that made my knees weak. A trail of footprints in the snow, heading away from me. But they weren't normal footprints. They were huge, at least 18 inches long, and the stride was impossible. No human walks with steps that wide. The prints were fresh, maybe minutes old, and they were filled with dark spots that looked like blood. I followed them for another 50 yards before I lost my nerve. The trail led into a thick stand of pine trees where the shadows were already deep. From somewhere in that darkness, I heard Danny's voice again. "Robert," it called, using my name. "I'm so cold. Please help me." But something was wrong with how he said it. The words came out too slow, like he was tasting each one. And underneath his voice, I heard something else, a wet chewing sound. I backed away from those trees, my heart hammering. When I turned around, I saw more tracks. Dozens of them, all the same impossible size, circling the area where I'd been. Standing, I ran back to the shelter as fast as my snowshoes would carry me. I needed to get out of there, needed to radio for help. But when I got back to the destroyed hut, I found something that made my blood freeze. My own footprints led away from the shelter, heading in the opposite direction from where I'd come. 2 sets of tracks, one heading out, one coming back. But I'd only made the trip once. Something had been wearing my boots. I made it back to my station by dark, but I knew I wasn't safe. The forest felt alive around me, watching and waiting. Every shadow could be hiding something. Every sound of wind through the trees could be covering footsteps. I tried to fix my radio, but the damage was too bad. I was completely cut off, and the weather was getting worse. The forecast had called for another week of storms. Even if I could get a signal out, no helicopter could reach me in this. I barricaded the doors and windows, then sat by the fire with my rifle across my knees. That's when I found the journal. It was on my desk, even though I'd locked the place up tight before leaving. The handwriting was Danny's, but the words didn't make sense. Day 12. The hunger is getting worse. We ate the last of the rations yesterday, but it doesn't help. Bill tried to stop me from eating the ... I can't write it, but I'm getting bigger, stronger, and I can't stop thinking about meat. My hands shook as I read on. Day 15. Bill's gone. I think I know where he went. The same place I'm going. The hunger isn't just for food anymore. It's for something else. Something warm and moving. I can hear their hearts beating from miles away. The last entry was dated yesterday. I'm not Danny anymore. I'm something else. Something that needs to feed. Robert's coming soon. I can smell him on the wind. I'll wear his face when I'm done. I threw the journal in the fire and watched. It burnt, but the words stayed with me. I could taste them in my mouth like ash. That night, I heard voices outside my station. All the patrol members, calling for help. But I knew better now. Whatever was out there, it wasn't them anymore. The voices circled my cabin all night, getting closer and closer. Sometimes they sounded hurt and desperate. Sometimes they laughed, like children playing a game. And sometimes they made sounds that no human throat could make. When morning came, I found tracks all around my station. Not just the big ones, normal-sized prints too, but walking in patterns that hurt to look at. They led to my supply shed, where I found my emergency food stores torn open and scattered. I had enough provisions for maybe 3 days. After that, I'd be as hungry as whatever was hunting me. On the second day, I saw it. I was watching through my window when something moved between the trees. At first, I thought it was a man walking hunched over against the cold, but as it got closer, I realized my mistake. It was huge, at least 11 feet tall, but thin as a skeleton. Its skin was grey-white, stretched tight over bones that jutted out like broken fence posts. Its arms were too long, hanging down past its knees, and its fingers ended in black claws. But the worst part was its head. It looked almost human, but the mouth was too wide, filled with yellow teeth that came to points, and its eyes, they glowed like hot coals in the darkness. It stood at the edge of my clearing for a long time, just watching. Then it opened its mouth and spoke in Danny's voice. "Robert," it said, "I'm so hungry. Won't you come out and help me?" I gripped my rifle tighter, but I didn't dare move. This thing was too close, too big, and something told me the bullets wouldn't stop it. "I know you're in there," it continued. "I can smell your fear. It smells like meat." Then it turned and walked away, leaving those impossible tracks in the snow. On the third day, I found Tommy Yazzie. I'd gone out to check my snares more from habit than hope when I heard sobbing from the old equipment shed. Real sobbing, not the fake cries I'd been hearing at night. Tommy was the youngest member of the patrol, barely I found him huddled in the corner, his clothes torn and bloody, but he was alive. "Robert," he whispered when he saw me. "Thank God, I thought I was going to die out here." I helped him back to the station, gave him water and what little food I had left, but something was wrong. Tommy kept looking at me with hungry eyes, and when he talked, I could see that his teeth were getting sharper. "The others," he said between sips of water, "they changed. Robert, the hunger got so bad that they started eating each other, and once they started, they couldn't stop. It changed them into something else." "What happened to you?" I asked. "I ran," he said, "but I can feel it starting in me too. The hunger, it's not just for food anymore. It's for warm meat, living meat." He looked at me, and I saw something terrible in his eyes. "I'm trying to fight it," he said, "but I don't know how much longer I can hold on. You need to get out of here, Robert, before I change completely." That night, I woke up to find Tommy standing over my bed. His face had gotten longer, and his teeth were definitely sharper. He was reaching for me with hands that ended in claws. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so hungry." I rolled away just as he lunged, and we crashed through the front door into the snow. Tommy was stronger than he should have been, and faster, but he was still learning how to use his new body. I managed to get to my rifle and put 3 rounds in his chest. He stumbled backward, but he didn't fall. Instead, he smiled at me with a mouth full of razor teeth. "It doesn't hurt," he said. "Nothing hurts anymore." Then he howled, and something answered from the woods. The real thing. The one that had been hunting me. It came out of the trees like a moving nightmare. 11 feet of hunger and hate. This close, I could see that it still wore scraps of human clothing: Bill's jacket, Danny's boots. But the thing inside those clothes wasn't human anymore. "You smell like fear," it said in a voice like grinding bones. "But you'll taste like meat." I ran. I crashed through the woods with that thing howling behind me, following my tracks in the snow. My only chance was the old mine shaft about a mile north. If I could reach it, maybe I could hide until help came. But I knew help wasn't coming. The storm had been going for a week, and it showed no signs of stopping. I was alone with monsters that had once been men, and I could feel the hunger starting to gnaw at my own belly. The thing caught up with me at the frozen lake. It landed in front of me like a spider, blocking my path to the mine. Up close, I could see that parts of Bill and Danny were still there, trapped inside this nightmare of teeth and claws. "Join us," it said. "The hunger stops when you stop fighting it." I looked at the ice beneath my feet, remembering the emergency charges I kept in my pack. Enough explosive to break up ice jams, if you knew how to use them. "I've got a better idea," I said, and pulled the pins on every charge I had. The explosion shattered the ice for 50 yards in every direction. The thing let out a scream that sounded like all 3 patrol members crying at once, and then it disappeared into the black water. I barely made it to shore before the cold started shutting down my body. But I was alive, and the thing was gone. They found me 2 days later, nearly frozen to death by the lake. The rescue team said I was delirious, talking about monsters and cannibals. The official report called it an avalanche accident. 3 members of the ski patrol lost in a slide. 1 survivor found suffering from exposure and hypothermia. Nobody believed what I told them. Nobody wanted to hear about Wendigo or hunger that could change a man's soul. They said the cold had affected my brain, made me see things that weren't there. But I know what I saw. I know what happened to Bill and Danny and Tommy, and I know that putting explosive charges under the ice doesn't kill something that was already dead inside. I quit the Park Service after that. Couldn't stand being in the woods anymore. Couldn't trust the silence between the trees. I moved to the city, got a job in an office building where I could see other people all day long. But I still dream about that winter. I wake up some nights with the taste of hunger in my mouth, and I have to check my teeth in the mirror to make sure they haven't gotten sharper. The worst part is the craving. Not just for food. I eat plenty now, maybe too much. It's the craving for something else, something warm and moving and alive. I fight it every day. I remind myself that I'm still human, still Robert Frostborn. But sometimes, when I'm really hungry, I catch myself looking at people differently, wondering what they'd taste like. Last month, I got a letter from the new ranger at my old station. He'd found some bones in the woods, arranged in a circle like they were waiting for something. Human bones, gnawed clean. He wanted to know if I'd seen anything like that before. I didn't write back. Some hungers are too dangerous to feed, even with words. But I keep the letter on my desk as a reminder. The Wendigo is still out there, waiting in the deep woods where hunger can transform a man into something else. And sometimes, on the coldest nights, I wonder if it's still wearing my face. In the mountains, they say hunger is just another way of dying, but they're wrong. Sometimes, hunger is just another way of living forever. My name is Margaret Wolfhart, and I've spent 11 years as a park ranger on the Apostle Islands. People think that name sounds made up, but it's real, half Irish from my mum, half Ojibwe from my dad. The wolf part isn't just coincidence. I've studied wolves my whole life, got my PhD in marine biology, and I know more about pack behavior than most people know about their own families. The Apostle Islands sit in Lake Superior like scattered pieces of a broken puzzle. 2 islands total, most uninhabited, covered in old-growth forests that haven't been touched for hundreds of years. In September 1978, when this all happened, I was living on Oak Island with my 8-year-old daughter Sarah during school breaks. The rest of the year, she lived on the mainland with my sister so she could attend regular school. I loved the isolation. 12 miles from the nearest town, accessible only by boat, with radio contact that worked maybe half the time. The islands were my world, and I thought I knew every tree, every rock, every animal that called them home. The morning it all started, I was drinking coffee on my cabin porch when the radio crackled to life. It was Tom Bradley from the research station on Sand Island. "Margaret, you need to get over here." His voice was tight, worried. "We've got some strange kills." "What kind of strange deer?" "5 of them. But there, arranged like someone set them up on purpose." I grabbed my gear and took the boat across choppy water. September storms were starting early that year, and the fog was so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. When I reached Sand Island, Tom was waiting at the dock, his face pale. "I've been studying wildlife for 20 years, he said, leading me up the trail. "Never seen anything like this." The kill site was in a clearing about half a mile inland. 5 white-tailed deer lay in a perfect circle, their bodies positioned with their heads pointing toward the center. The precision was Scavenger had touched them. No flies buzzed around the wounds. The forest was completely silent. "Wolves?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Look at the wounds." Tom pointed to the largest deer. "Clean cuts, too clean. And look at this." He showed me tracks in the soft earth around the circle. They started as normal wolf prints, but as they moved closer to the deer, they changed. The rear prints showed something impossibly inopposable. Thumb, and some of the prints were longer, like the animal had been walking upright. "Has to be dogs," I said, trying to convince myself. Someone's pet got loose, maybe a hybrid. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't right. The arrangement was too deliberate, too ceremonial, and the tracks showed a level of intelligence that made my skin crawl. That night, I radioed my daughter on the mainland. Just hearing her voice made me feel better. "Mom, when are you coming home?" she asked. "Soon, sweetheart. Just have to figure out what's bothering the animals up here." After I hung up, I sat in my cabin listening to the wind, but underneath the normal forest sounds, I heard something else howling that seemed to carry words. My grandmother used to tell stories about the Miingan wolf spirits that could walk like men. I'd always thought they were just tales to keep kids from wandering into the forest alone. Now I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I brought my research assistant Tim Rodriguez to the site. Tim was fresh out of college, eager to prove himself, and he had a good eye for detail. He took photos and measurements while I examined the tracks more carefully. "Margaret, look at this," Tim called from the edge of the clearing. He was crouched next to a large pine tree, pointing at marks in the bark. "These aren't claw marks." I walked over and felt my stomach drop. Carved into the tree, about 7 feet up, were symbols. Not random scratches, actual symbols. They looked like a crude map of the islands, with lines connecting them in a pattern I didn't recognize. "Could be kids playing pranks," Tim suggested, but his voice was shaky. "Kids would need a ladder to reach this high," I said. "And these cuts are deep, made with something sharp and strong." We spent the rest of the day documenting everything. The wildlife cameras I'd set up around the island kept malfunctioning, showing only static whenever they should have captured the clearing. My radio couldn't reach the mainland, and the compass spun wildly whenever I got close to the symbols. On the tree that evening, we were eating dinner in the research station when we heard the howling start. It began like normal wolf sounds, but then it changed. The howls started forming patterns, almost like a language, and underneath it all, I swear I heard something that sounded like my name. "Margaret, ... Tim heard it too. "That's not possible," he whispered. The howling came from different directions, north, south, east, west. We were surrounded. I grabbed my rifle and checked the locks on the doors and windows. The research station was solid, built to withstand storms, but suddenly it felt as fragile as paper. Through the window, I saw shapes moving between the trees. They were too tall to be normal wolves, moving on 2 legs as often as 4. In the moonlight, I caught glimpses of fur and muscle, but also something terrifyingly human in the way they moved. "What do we do?" Tim asked. "We wait for dawn," I said, "and then we get off this island." But the shapes had other plans. Around midnight, we heard scratching at the walls. Not Kloss, something sharper, more deliberate. When I looked out the window, I saw one of them standing just at the edge of the light. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall when standing upright, with a wolf's head but human-like shoulders and arms. Its eyes reflected the light like mirrors, and when it saw me watching, it tilted its head in a gesture that was disturbingly intelligent. Then it spoke. "You, no, nothing, The words were barely recognizable, formed by a mouth not meant for human speech, but they were clear enough. This thing, whatever it was, could talk. Tim grabbed the radio and tried to call for help, but all we got was static. The scratching sounds moved around the building, and I realized there were more of them, at least 6, maybe more, testing the walls, looking for weaknesses. The largest one, the Alpha, I realized approached the front door. It didn't try to break in. Instead, it waited, patient, like it knew we'd have to come out eventually. "We need to stay calm," I told Tim. "Wolves respond to confidence. If we show fear, they'll attack." But even as I said it, I knew these weren't normal wolves. They were something else entirely, something that had learned to think like humans but kept the instincts of predators. The waiting began. Dawn came grey and foggy, but the creatures were gone. Tim and I ventured outside carefully, rifles ready. The ground around the research station was covered in tracks, dozens of them, all showing the same impossible anatomy. Human-like hands, wolf-like feet, creatures that could move on 2 legs, or 4 as needed. "We need to leave," Tim said. Now, I wanted to agree, but something stopped me. These islands were my responsibility. If there were dangerous animals here, I needed to understand them before anyone else got hurt. "One more day," I said. "We document everything. Then we call in the experts." Tim looked at me like I was crazy, but he nodded. We were scientists. This was the discovery of a lifetime. We followed the tracks deeper into the forest. They led to a clearing I'd never seen before, even after 11 years on the islands. In the center stood a structure made of branches and stones, built with the same intelligence as the deer arrangement. It was primitive but deliberate. A shelter or meeting place around the structure. We found evidence of tool use. Carved bones sharpened to points, stones shaped into crude knives, even what looked like a spear made from a straight branch with a carved stone tip. "Margaret," Tim's voice was barely a whisper. "They're watching us." I looked up and saw them, at least 9 of them, positioned in the trees around the clearing. They weren't hiding. They wanted us to see them. The Alpha, the big one from the night before, dropped down from a branch and landed 20 feet away. It studied us with those mirror-bright eyes, then made a sound that might have been laughter. It picked up the spear and hefted it like a weapon, showing us it knew how to use it. "Back away slowly," I whispered to Tim. "Don't run." But Tim panicked. He turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush. The Alpha's head snapped toward the sound, and I saw its muscles tense. In that moment, I understood pack behavior in a way I never had before. Tim had just identified himself as prey. The Alpha howled, and the others responded. They moved through the trees like flowing water, cutting off Tim's escape routes. I heard him scream once, then silence. I was alone with the Alpha. It approached me slowly, the spear held ready, but instead of attacking, it stopped just out of reach and tilted its head. It was studying me, trying to understand what I was. "You, no, wolves," it said, the words coming easier now. "Yes," I managed to say, "I know wolves." It nodded, a disturbingly human gesture. Then it pointed to itself with the spear tip. "Not wolf. More." It turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the clearing. The message was clear. I was being allowed to leave, but Tim wasn't coming with me. I found his body an hour later, arranged in the same ceremonial circle as the deer. But unlike the deer, he hadn't been killed for food. This was a message, a warning about what happened to those who ran from the pack. That night, I barricaded myself in the research station and tried to radio for help. But every time I reached for the radio, I heard them howling outside. They were letting me know they were still there, still watching. The strangest part was the dreams. When I finally fell asleep, I dreamed I was running through the forest on 4 legs, hunting with the pack. I could smell things I'd never smelled before, hear sounds beyond human range, and in the dream, I understood their language perfectly. They were ancient, these creatures. They'd been on the islands for generations, maybe centuries. They called themselves the Forgotten Pack, and they remembered when the islands were theirs alone. They'd learned to think like humans because they'd had to survive in a world that no longer had room for them. When I woke up, I could still smell the forest scents from the dream, and I knew, somehow, that they had been inside my head. The next morning, I made a decision that probably saved my life. Instead of trying to escape, I walked back to the clearing where they'd built their structure. The Alpha was waiting for me, along with the rest of the pack. "I want to understand," I said out loud. The Alpha nodded and gestured for me to sit. The others formed a circle around us, but they kept their distance. I realized this was a formal meeting, conducted according to pack rules I was only beginning to understand. "You ... study us," the Alpha said. Its voice was getting clearer with practice. "Why? It's my job to protect these islands," I said. "All the life here. We ... protect ... too. Long time before humans." And then, in a mixture of broken English and something deeper images and feelings that appeared directly in my mind, it told me their story. They weren't wolves that had learned to walk upright. They were something older, a species that had existed alongside humans for thousands of years. My grandmother's stories had been right. The Miingan were real. They were the bridge between the human and animal worlds, guardians of the boundary between civilization and wilderness. But as humans spread across the continent, the Miingan had been forced to retreat to the most remote places. The Apostle Islands were one of their last refuges, a place where they could exist without being hunted or studied or turned into legends. "Why did you kill Tim?" I asked. The Alpha's eyes grew sad. He ... run like prey. Pack ... responds to prey. "But you didn't kill me. You ... understand. Pack. You ... respect." Then came the test. The Alpha stood and picked up the spear, holding it out at me. The meaning was clear. I could take it and fight, or I could submit to pack authority. I knew enough about wolf behavior to understand what submission meant. I lowered my eyes and tilted my head to the side, exposing my neck. It was the ultimate gesture of trust. If the Alpha wanted to kill me, I was giving him the chance. The Alpha studied me for a long moment, then set the spear aside. He placed one large, clawed hand on my shoulder, and I felt a strange warmth flow through me. It wasn't painful, but it was changing something fundamental about how I perceived the world. "You ... marked now," he said. "Pack ... knows you. Safe." I understood that I was being granted something precious, acceptance by a species that had learned to trust no one. But it came with a price. I could never speak about what I'd learned, never bring others to the islands to study them. The pack would know if I broke that trust. "The islands stay closed," I said. "No more researchers." The Alpha nodded. "Good. We watch. Always." As I prepared to leave, the Alpha spoke one more time. "Your daughter ... she's safe. Pack ... remembers friends." That's when I realized they knew everything about me, where I lived, who I cared about, what mattered to me. They'd been watching me for years, learning about me the same way I'd been learning about them. The pack escorted me to the shore, moving through the forest like shadows. At the dock, the Alpha touched my shoulder again. "You ... welcome here, but bring no others." I nodded and got in my boat. As I pulled away from the island, I could see them watching from the tree line. 9 figures that looked like the stories my grandmother used to tell. I filed my report 3 days later. Equipment malfunction. Research assistant lost in hiking. Accident. Recommend closing Sand Island to further research due to unstable terrain and dangerous wildlife. The bureaucrats were happy to stamp the paperwork, one less thing to worry about. The islands were officially closed to researchers within a month. The public story was environmental protection, preserving the pristine ecosystem. Only I knew the real reason. Tim's family held a memorial service. I attended and lied to his parents about how he died, telling them he was a brave researcher who cared about conservation. It was the least I could do, but the hardest part was living with what I'd learned. I'd made contact with a species that it shouldn't exist, creatures that bridged the gap between human and animal consciousness. They'd marked me somehow, changed me in ways I was still discovering. I found I could sense things I'd never sensed before. When I walked through forests, I could feel the presence of every animal within a mile radius. I could read the emotional states of wolves and dogs just by looking at them. And sometimes, on quiet nights, I could hear the pack howling from the islands, even when I was on the mainland. My relationship with my daughter changed too. Sarah noticed that I understood her moods better, that I could sense when she was upset or excited before she said anything. She started calling me Mom, the mind reader, and I never corrected her. The pack kept their word. Over the years, a few tourists tried to land on the closed islands, but they were always turned away by sudden storms or equipment failures. The pack had learned to work with the natural world in ways that made human intrusion nearly impossible. I continued my work as a park ranger, but I never forgot the lesson I'd learned. There are species on this planet that have evolved beyond what we think is possible. Creatures that have learned to think and plan and remember in ways that challenge everything we believe about the boundary between human and animal intelligence. Sometimes I wonder what other species are out there, hiding in the remote places of the world, protecting themselves from discovery. The pack that remembers taught me that evolution doesn't always follow the rules we've written in textbooks. And every September, when the storms start rolling across Lake Superior, I listen for their howls. They're still there, still watching, still remembering. The islands belong to them now, as they always have. Some boundaries are meant to be respected, not crossed. The pack taught me that too. My name is Margaret Wolfhart, and I'm one of the few humans who knows that we're not alone in our ability to think, to plan, to remember. The difference is, we forgot how to live in harmony with the wild world. They never did. My name is Jonathan Talfeather, and I've been a park ranger for 14 years. I've seen a lot of things in the redwoods that most people never will. Forest fires that burn for weeks, tourists who get lost and panic, bears that wander too close to campsites. But what happened in August 1984 changed everything I thought I knew about these ancient trees. The redwoods are the tallest trees on earth. Some of them were already giants when Jesus was born. Walking among them feels like being in a cathedral made by God himself. The morning fog rolls in from the Pacific Ocean and gets caught in their branches, making everything look magical and mysterious. It's beautiful, but it can also be scary. Sound travels weird in the fog. You might hear footsteps following you, but when you turn around, there's nothing there. I'm half Yurok on my mother's side. My grandmother used to tell stories about the Ormat, giant creatures that lived in the deepest parts of the forest. She said they were older than the trees themselves, and they watched over the woods like guardians. They're not evil, she'd say, but they don't like people who hurt the forest. I never believed those stories. I figured Bigfoot was just something the gift shops made up to sell postcards to tourists. I had a college degree in anthropology, and I knew the difference between folklore and facts. Besides, I had real problems to deal with, like making sure hikers didn't fall off cliffs or get eaten by bears. My wife Sarah died in a car accident. 3 years before this story happened, our son Marcus was 15 and angry at the world. He blamed me for not being there when she died, for always being out in the forest instead of home with the family. He wasn't wrong. After Sarah passed, I spent even more time in the woods. It was the only place where the pain felt manageable. The section of park where I worked contained the tallest trees in the world. Some of them were over 350 feet high, taller than the Statue of Liberty. They were so big that you could drive a car through the base of some of them. The forest was so thick that even on sunny days, it felt like twilight down on the ground. Your voice would echo strange among the massive trunks, and sometimes you'd hear sounds that didn't make sense, like someone walking behind you, but bigger and heavier than any person. August 1984 was one of the hottest summers on record. The fog that usually kept the forest cool and wet wasn't coming in as much. Fire danger was high, and everyone was on edge. The logging companies were pushing hard to cut down more trees before new environmental laws could stop them. Protesters were camping in the forest, trying to protect the oldest groves. It was a mess of angry people who all thought they were right. That's when the reports started coming in. Diana Moss, one of the protest leaders, came to the ranger station on a Tuesday morning. She was about my age, with long brown hair and dirt under her fingernails from living in the forest. She looked scared, which wasn't like her. Diana wasn't afraid of anything, not the logging companies, not the police, not even the biggest bears. Something destroyed our equipment last night, she told me. Not something. The way the metal was twisted, the way the trees were broken, it wasn't human. I poured her a cup of coffee and sat down across from her. What do you mean? Not human? I mean whatever did this was strong enough to pick up a generator that takes 4 men to move. and throw it 30 feet into a tree. There were handprints on the metal. Jonathan, handprints bigger than dinner plates. I figured it was the logging company trying to scare the protesters. Companies did stuff like that all the time. Send in some tough guys in the middle of the night to mess with the tree huggers. But Diana showed me photos, and I had to admit they were strange. The generator was wrapped around a tree trunk, like someone had thrown it there. The metal was twisted in ways that would take serious machinery to do. "I'll come take a look," I told her. "But I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation." Diana laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. That's what I thought too, until I saw the footprints. The hike to the protest camp took us deep into the old growth section. These trees were massive, some of them 30 feet across at the base. The canopy was so thick that we needed flashlights, even though it was the middle of the day. Our footsteps were muffled by centuries of fallen needles and leaves. Every shadow looked like it might be hiding something. "The campsite is just ahead," Diana said, but her voice was quieter than usual. "Fair warning, it's pretty messed up." She wasn't kidding. The campsite looked like a tornado had hit it. Tents were shredded and hanging from tree branches. 20 feet up, a picnic table had been snapped in half, and the pieces were scattered around like toys. The generator Diana had told me about was indeed wrapped around a redwood trunk, 40 feet up from the ground. But it was the silence that really got to me. In 14 years of working in these woods, I'd never heard silence like this. No birds singing, no insects buzzing, no squirrels chattering. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. "Where is everyone?" I asked. "They left after last night. Can't say I blame them." Diana picked up a piece of metal that had been twisted into a pretzel shape. "We've been here for 3 weeks, and nothing like this ever happened. Then yesterday morning, we found this." She led me to a clearing about 50 yards from the wrecked campsite. The ground was soft there, and in the dirt were footprints. But these weren't like any footprints I'd ever seen. They were huge, at least 22 inches long and 8 inches wide. The toes were clearly defined, and you could see the arch of the foot. They were definitely from something that walked on 2 legs, but they were way too big to be human. I knelt down and measured one with my ranger tape. 22.5 inches. I wear a size 11 boot, which is about 12 inches long. Whatever made these tracks had feet almost twice as long as mine. "Could be fake," I said, but even as I said it, I didn't believe it. The prints were pressed deep into the earth, deeper than a human could make, even jumping with both feet, and they were part of a clear trail that led deeper into the forest. "That's what I thought too," Diana said, "until I followed them. The trail led us through a part of the forest I'd never seen before, even after 14 years. The trees here were enormous, some of the biggest I'd ever encountered. The footprints were clear in the soft earth, and they were spaced about 4 feet apart. Whatever made them had a stride longer than a basketball player. After about a quarter-mile, the trail led to a small clearing. In the center was a pile of rocks that had been carefully stacked about 6 feet high. Around the pile were bones, deer bones, bear bones, and some I couldn't identify. They were all clean, picked completely bare. "Animals don't stack rocks," Diana said. She was right. The rock pile was too neat, too purposeful. Someone or something had built it. But why? And what was it for? That's when I heard it. A sound, like nothing I'd ever heard before. It started low, almost like a growl, but then it rose higher and became something like a scream. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, bouncing off the massive tree trunks and echoing through the forest. The sound made my teeth ache and my skin crawl. Diana grabbed my arm. "We need to leave now." But I was already moving. My ranger training kicked in, and I knew we were in danger. Real danger. Whatever made that sound was big, and it was close. We ran back through the forest, following our own footprints in the soft earth. Behind us, I could hear branches breaking and what sounded like something very large moving through the trees. We made it back to the main trail without seeing whatever was following us, but I could feel it watching us go. The hair on the back of my neck stood up the whole way back to the ranger station. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those footprints, about the sound we'd heard, about the way the forest had gone completely silent. I'd lived in these woods my whole life, and I'd never experienced anything like it. Around 3 in the morning, I gave up trying to sleep and went out to my truck. I drove back to the area where we'd found the footprints, parking on the main road and hiking in with my flashlight. I told myself I was just being thorough, doing my job as a ranger. But really, I needed to know what was out there. The footprints were still there, clear as day in the beam of my flashlight. But there were new ones too, a whole trail of them leading in a different direction. I followed them for about 50 yards before I found something that made my blood run cold. A tree had been snapped in half. Not cut down, snapped. The trunk was about 2 feet thick, and it had been broken off about 8 feet from the ground. The top half was lying on the forest floor, and the break was clean and fresh. To break a tree that size, you'd need heavy machinery or explosives. But there were no tire tracks, no signs of any equipment. Just those massive footprints, leading right up to the broken tree. I was examining the break when I heard it again, that low growl that turned into a scream. This time it was closer, much closer, and this time I could tell it was coming from above me, from up in the canopy. I looked up and saw something that made me forget how to breathe. About 40 feet up, perched on a branch that should have been too small to hold it, was a shape. It was huge and covered in dark hair, and it was looking right at me with eyes that reflected my flashlight beam like a cat's. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Then it moved, and I realized how big it really was. It had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe 9. Its shoulders were wider than 2 men standing side by side, and it was moving through the trees like they were jungle gyms, swinging from branch to branch with impossible grace for something so large. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran as fast as I've ever run in my life. Behind me, I could hear it following, moving through the canopy above me. Branches cracked and leaves rustled as it kept pace, without even seeming to try. I didn't look back until I reached my truck. When I finally did turn around, it was standing at the edge of the tree line, maybe 50 yards away. In the red glow of my taillights, I could see it clearly for the first time. It was massive, covered in dark brown hair, and it walked upright, like a person. Its face was more human than animal, but bigger and more primitive. Its eyes were intelligent, not the blank stare of a wild animal, but the focused gaze of something that was thinking. It watched me get in my truck and drive away. And I swear, just before I lost sight of it, I saw it raise one enormous hand in what might have been a wave. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat in my kitchen, drinking coffee and trying to make sense of what I'd seen. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself it was just a bear. Bears can stand on their hind legs, and in the dark, with just a flashlight, maybe I'd misjudged the size. But then Diana called. "Jonathan, you need to get out here, now." Something happened to Jake Morrison. Jake was one of the loggers who'd been working the area near the protest camp. He was a big guy, about 6'4" and built like a linebacker. He'd been working in the woods for 20 years and wasn't scared of anything. I found him about 2 miles from where I'd seen the creature the night before. He was sitting on a log, staring at nothing, his face white as paper. His hard hat was missing, and his shirt was torn. When I called his name, he looked at me like he didn't recognize me. "Jake, what happened? Are you hurt?" He shook his head slowly. "I don't know. I was cutting down a tree, and then, I was up there." He pointed to a spot about 30 feet up in a nearby redwood. "I was just hanging there, caught in the branches like a doll. I don't remember how I got up there, and I don't remember getting down." I looked up at the tree he was pointing to. There were broken branches about 30 feet up, and his chainsaw was hanging from a branch even higher than that. There was no way he could have climbed up there, especially carrying a chainsaw. "Did you see what did this to you?" Jake's hands were shaking. "I saw ... something big, bigger than anything I've ever seen. It had eyes like a person, but not like a person. You know what I mean." I did know. I'd seen those same eyes the night before. "Jake, I'm going to take you to the hospital, get you checked out." "No." He grabbed my arm. "Don't leave me alone. It's still out there. It's watching us right now." I looked around the forest, but I didn't see anything. Still, the hair on the back of my neck was standing up again. The forest was too quiet, just like it had been at the protest camp. Over the next 3 days, more things happened. Equipment kept getting destroyed in ways that didn't make sense. A bulldozer was found flipped upside down in a creek bed. No one knew how it got there. It would have taken a crane to flip something that heavy. A whole section of newly cut trees was found stacked in a perfect pyramid, 30 feet high. The logging crew swore they'd left them scattered on the ground, but it was the sounds that really got to everyone. Every night, just after sunset, we'd hear that same growl scream echoing through the forest. It was answered by other sounds, wood knocking, like someone hitting tree trunks with a baseball bat, but louder. The sounds seemed to come from all directions, like there was more than one of whatever was out there. The logging crew started refusing to work alone. Even the toughest guys were scared. They'd work in groups of 4 or 5, and they'd quit, early every day, long before dark. Some of them quit altogether and left town. Then Diana showed me the hair. She'd found it caught on a branch about 12 feet up in a tree. It was coarse and dark brown, about 6 inches long, but it wasn't like any animal hair I'd ever seen. It was too thick, too coarse. I sent a sample to a friend of mine who worked at a lab in San Francisco. The results came back 3 days later. The hair was from a primate, but not any primate that was supposed to exist. It was closest to human hair, but the individual strands were much thicker and the structure was different. My friend called it anomalous and asked where I'd found it. I didn't tell him. By the end of the week, the logging company was getting desperate. They'd invested a lot of money in the equipment and the permits, and they were losing money every day the work stopped. They brought in security guards, tough guys with guns, who were supposed to protect the workers and keep the protesters away. That's when things got really bad. I was doing my evening patrol when I heard gunshots. 3 quick shots, then silence. I radioed for backup and headed toward the sound. I found 2 of the security guards standing in a clearing, their faces white with terror. Their guns were on the ground, and they were holding on to each other like scared children. What happened? Who were you shooting at? The older guard, a guy named Rick who'd been in the army, could barely speak. It wasn't human, it was ... Christ. I don't know what it was. We saw it moving through the trees, and Tommy took a shot at it. The thing just looked at us, and then it smiled, like it thought it was funny, like it was playing with us. Then it just disappeared. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone, but we could hear it laughing. It was laughing at us. I found the 3rd guard, Tommy, about 50 yards away. He was unconscious, hanging upside down from a tree branch about 20 feet up. He was alive, but he had a concussion and no memory of how he got there, just like Jake Morrison. That night, I made a decision. I was going to go back to the forest and find this thing. I was going to get answers, even if it killed me. I told myself I was doing it for public safety, to protect the people in my park. But really, I think I was doing it because I couldn't stand not knowing. In all my years as a ranger, I'd never encountered anything I couldn't explain. Bears, mountain lions, forest fires, flash floods. I understood all of those, but this was different. This was something that shouldn't exist, and it was in my forest. I spent the day preparing. I brought extra batteries for my flashlight, a first aid kit, and my service pistol. I didn't think the gun would do much good against something that could flip over bulldozers, but it made me feel better to have it. Just before sunset, I hiked back to the area where I'd first seen the creature. The forest was dead quiet again, like all the animals had fled. I found a good spot with my back against a big tree and settled in to wait. I didn't have to wait long. The wood knocking started just after dark, slow, rhythmic beats that seemed to come from all around me. Then I heard footsteps, big, heavy footsteps that shook the ground. They were coming closer. I turned on my flashlight and saw it standing about 20 yards away, just at the edge of the beam. It was even bigger than I remembered, at least 9 feet tall, covered in dark brown hair. Its face was like a cross between a man and an ape, but the eyes were definitely intelligent. It was studying me the same way I was studying it. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. Then it did something I never expected. It sat down, not like an animal, but like a person. It folded its long legs and sat cross-legged on the forest floor, never taking its eyes off me. Then it started making sounds, not growls or screams, but something that sounded almost like talking. The sounds were deep and rumbling, but they had rhythm and pattern, like a language. I don't know what made me do it, but I set my gun down and sat down too. The creature seemed to relax when I did that. It kept making those sounds, and I found myself trying to respond. I made some low sounds back, not words, but just noise. The creature tilted its head, listening. For the next hour, we sat there, trying to communicate. I started to understand that it was trying to tell me something. It would make sounds and then gesture toward different parts of the forest. It seemed upset about something, agitated. Then it stood up and walked away, but not very far. It stopped about 30 feet away and looked back at me, like it wanted me to follow. Against every instinct I had, I picked up my gun and followed. It led me deeper into the forest than I'd ever been, to a part where the trees were so old and so big that they seemed like living skyscrapers. The creature moved quietly despite its size, and I had to work to keep up. We walked for about a mile before it stopped. We were in a clearing I'd never seen before. In the center was a circle of the biggest redwoods I'd ever encountered. They were ancient. Some of them had to be over 2,000 years old. Their trunks were so massive that 10 people holding hands couldn't reach around them. The creature gestured at the trees and made more of those rumbling sounds. This time, I understood. It was trying to tell me that these trees were special, that they needed to be protected. This was its home, its sacred place. And tomorrow, the logging company was planning to cut them down. I spent the rest of the night in that sacred grove, trying to understand what I'd gotten myself into. The creature, I couldn't keep thinking of it as it anymore, because it was clearly intelligent, clearly a who rather than a what, stayed nearby. Sometimes I'd see it moving through the trees, and sometimes I'd just hear those rumbling sounds that I was starting to think of as its language. As dawn broke through the canopy, I began to see the grove clearly for the first time. It was breathtaking. The trees were arranged in a perfect circle, like they'd been planted that way, though I knew they were far too old for that. The ground between them was covered in soft moss and ferns, and everything was green and alive in a way that felt almost magical. But there were also signs of the creature's presence. High up in the trees, I could see platforms made of woven branches, sleeping places. I realized they were tools made from stone and wood, carefully crafted and arranged. This wasn't just a place where a wild animal lived. This was a home. The creature appeared at the edge of the clearing just as the sun was coming up. In the morning light, I could see it more clearly than ever before. Its face was remarkably human-like, with intelligent brown eyes and expressions that I could almost read. It was definitely male, and definitely old. There were silver streaks in the dark hair on his face and head. He made those rumbling sounds again, and I tried to respond. We were getting better at communicating, and I thought I understood what he was trying to tell me. His people, because there had been others, though he seemed to be the last, had lived in this grove for thousands of years. They were the guardians my grandmother had told me about, the Omar who watched over the forest. But now the loggers were coming, and he didn't know how to stop them. I tried to explain that I would help, that I would find a way to protect the grove, but even as I made the promise, I didn't know how I could keep it. The logging company had all the permits they needed. The trees were on private land, not part of the national park. Legally, there was nothing I could do. The sound of chainsaws in the distance cut through the morning air. The logging crew was starting early, and they were closer than I'd expected. Much closer. The creature, I decided to call him Guardian, heard the chainsaws too. He stood up to his full height, which was at least 9 feet, and made a sound unlike anything I'd heard before. It was part roar, part scream, and part something that sounded like grief. The sound echoed through the forest, and birds for miles around took flight. "I have to go," I told him, even though I wasn't sure he understood my words. "I have to try to stop them." But when I got to the edge of the grove, I could see it was too late. The logging crew had brought in their biggest equipment, industrial chainsaws, a massive crane, and a logging truck. They were already at work on the outer edge of the grove, cutting down trees that were probably 1,000 years old. Diana was there too, along with about a dozen other protesters. They were chaining themselves to trees, trying to stop the loggers, but the security guards were cutting the chains and dragging the protesters away. "Jonathan," Diana saw me and ran over. "Thank God you're here. They're going to destroy everything. You have to stop them." But I couldn't stop them. I was just a park ranger, and this wasn't even in my jurisdiction. The logging company had every right to cut down these trees, no matter how old they were or what lived among them. That's when Guardian made his decision. He came out of the deep forest like a force of nature. The loggers saw him first, a 9-foot figure covered in dark hair, moving through the trees with impossible grace. The first chainsaw went quiet, then the second. Within seconds, the entire worksite was silent, except for the sound of grown men screaming. Guardian didn't hurt anyone at first. He just walked through the worksite, and his presence was enough to send most of the crew running. But when one of the security guards raised his gun, Guardian moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. He grabbed the gun and crushed it like it was made of paper. Then he picked up the guard, a man who probably weighed 200 pounds, and hung him from a tree branch about 15 feet up. The guard wasn't hurt, just scared out of his mind. "Don't shoot him," I yelled to the other guards. "He's not trying to hurt anyone." But they weren't listening. They were too scared to think straight. More guns came out, and I knew someone was going to get killed. Guardian seemed to understand the danger too. He looked at me across the clearing, and I saw something in his eyes that I recognized. It was the same look I'd seen in the eyes of wild animals that had been backed into a corner. He was going to fight, and people were going to die. "Everyone stop," I shouted, putting myself between Guardian and the men with guns. "Put the guns down. He's not attacking anyone." "Are you crazy?" Rick, the head security guard, kept his gun trained on Guardian. "That thing is a monster." "He's not a monster," I said. "He's the guardian of this forest. He's been protecting these trees for longer than we've been alive, and we're about to destroy his home." Guardian was watching me, those intelligent eyes focused on my face. I think he understood that I was trying to help, but I could see the tension in his massive frame. He was ready to fight if he had to. "Look around you," I said to the loggers and security guards. "Look at these trees. Some of them are over 2,000 years old. They were here before Christ was born. They were here before any of us existed. Don't you think they deserve to live?" For a moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the wind in the ancient branches high above us. Then the logging foreman, a man named Bill Parker, stepped forward. "I don't care if these trees are 10,000 years old," he said. "We have a job to do, and we're going to do it. Monster or no monster." He gestured to his crew, and they started moving toward their equipment. Guardian let out that raw scream again, and this time it was answered by other sounds from deep in the forest. He wasn't alone after all. The sounds were coming from all directions, and they were getting closer. How many of them were there? I'd thought Guardian was the last of his kind, but maybe I was wrong. Maybe there were others, hidden in the deepest parts of the forest. "There's more than one," Rick said, his voice tight with fear. "We need to get out of here." But Bill Parker wasn't giving up. "We're not running from some overgrown ape. Get the big chainsaw. We're cutting down these trees, and if that thing gets in the way, we'll deal with it." That's when I realized what I had to do. I couldn't stop the logging company with words or laws, but I could stop them another way. I walked over to the biggest chainsaw and picked it up. It was heavy, probably 40 pounds, but I managed to lift it. Then I walked to the center of the grove and sat down with my back against the largest tree. "If you want to cut down these trees," I said, "you'll have to go through me first." Guardian looked at me for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised everyone. He sat down next to me, his massive form dwarfing my own. He was making those rumbling sounds again, but softer this time, almost like he was talking to me. "I can't let you destroy this place," I told Bill Parker. "I won't let you. You're crazy," Parker said. "You're both crazy." But I wasn't crazy. For the first time in years, I was thinking clearly. These trees had been here for thousands of years. They would be here for thousands more, if we let them. Guardian and his people had protected them all this time, and now it was my turn to help. The standoff lasted for hours. The loggers couldn't work with Guardian and me in the way, but they wouldn't leave either. The security guards kept their guns ready, but they didn't shoot. Maybe they were afraid of what would happen if they did. As the sun set, I heard the sounds again. Those were knocking sounds and calls from deep in the forest. Guardian answered them, and I realized they were talking to each other. His people were still out there, still watching, still protecting. "They're not going to leave," I told Parker. "This is their home. They'll fight to protect it. Then we'll fight them," Parker said, but he didn't sound as sure as he had that morning. That night, the forest came alive with sounds. Wood knocking, calls, the sound of large bodies moving through the trees. Guardian's people were out there, and they were letting us know it. The security guards huddled around their fire, jumping at every sound. By morning, most of the logging crew had quit. They loaded their equipment and drove away, leaving only Parker and a few die-hard workers. Even most of the security guards had gone. "This isn't over," Parker told me as he supervised the loading of the last truck. "We'll be back with more men, more guns. You can't protect this place forever." But I knew he was wrong. Guardian and his people had been protecting this forest for thousands of years. They weren't going to stop now. That was 30 years ago. The logging company never came back, officially, The grove was declared a protected archaeological site after I filed a report claiming to have found evidence of ancient Native American habitation. It wasn't exactly a lie. Guardian's people had been there far longer than any human tribe. The whole incident was hushed up. The logging company didn't want to admit they'd been scared off by what they claimed was just a man in a gorilla suit. The security guards signed non-disclosure agreements and never talked about what they'd seen. Even Diana and the other protesters agreed to keep quiet about Guardian in exchange for permanent protection of the grove. I never saw Guardian again after that day, but I know he's still out there. Sometimes, when I'm doing my evening patrol, I hear those wood-knocking sounds echoing through the forest. Sometimes I find small gifts left on my patrol routes, interesting stones, perfectly shaped pieces of wood, flowers arranged in patterns that seem too deliberate to be natural. Marcus, my son, is a forest ranger now too. He works in Olympic National Park in Washington, and he's got kids of his own. He's never said it directly, but I think he's proud of what I did back in 1984. He understands now why I spent so much time in the forest. It wasn't that I loved the trees more than my family. It was that I understood my responsibility to protect something that couldn't protect itself. The grove is still there, still protected. It's not open to the public officially. It's too dangerous for hikers. But sometimes, researchers are allowed in with special permits. They study the trees, the ecosystem, the unique environment. They don't know about Guardian and his people, but they're helping to protect them anyway. I retired from the ranger service 5 years ago, but I still live near the park. I still take walks in the forest, though I don't go as deep as I used to. I'm 73 now, and my knees aren't what they once were. But sometimes, on quiet evenings when the fog rolls in from the Pacific, I'll sit on my porch and listen to the sounds of the forest, and sometimes, if I listen carefully, I can hear them out there. The guardians, the Oma, the ones who watch over the ancient trees and keep the forest safe from those who would destroy it. People ask me sometimes if I really believe in Bigfoot. I tell them I believe in guardians. I believe there are things in this world that are older and wiser than we are, things that deserve our respect and protection. I believe that not everything that exists needs to be captured or studied or explained. Some things are better left alone. But I also believe that sometimes, when something precious is threatened, those guardians will reveal themselves to those who are willing to help. They'll trust us with their secrets, if we prove ourselves worthy of that trust. The trees Guardian showed me that morning in 1984 are still standing. They're still growing, still reaching toward the sky, still sheltering the creatures that live among their branches. And somewhere in their shadows, the guardians are still watching, still protecting, still keeping the ancient promises they made, long before any of us were born. I kept my promise too. I protected the grove, and I've kept Guardian's secret for 30 years. I'm telling this story now because I'm old, and because I think people need to know that there are still mysteries. In this world, there are still things that can't be explained by science or logic or common sense. There are still guardians in the forest, watching over the things that matter most. And sometimes, if you're very quiet and very respectful, you might hear them calling to each other in the ancient language of the trees.